In the 18th century, a consumer economy was initially developed in Europe through the mass production and importation of colonial goods by Western European trading nations, but was solidified by the employment of mercantilist policies by these nations. During the 15th century age of exploration, the Western European trading nations, Britain, France, and the Netherlands, created imperial empires overseas in the Americas and the West Indies, the quote, New World, as well as prominent trading posts throughout West Africa, India, and Southeast Asia. In the New World, these imperial nations established many colonies to provide themselves with lucrative natural resources such as cash crops and precious metals, while in India and Southeast Asia, trading posts gave Europeans access to exotic foreign goods and new markets. Two highly sought-after resources from the New World were sugar, which grew primarily in the warm climate of the West Indies, and tobacco, which thrived in North America. However, both sugar and tobacco were highly labor-intensive crops to farm, and most European colonists were not willing to put the work in themselves. They depended primarily on the labor of natives at first, but when they began to die off due to European diseases and overwork, the colonists were forced to find another cheap labor source. The transatlantic slave trade provided European colonists with the labor source they required, transporting 10 million to 12 million enslaved Africans across the Atlantic Ocean to the Americas throughout the 16th century all the way to the 19th century.
With slaves to cultivate their sugar and tobacco, plantation economies, agricultural economies dependent on mass production of a small variety of crops, emerged in the New World. The emergence of plantation economies led to the mass production of sugar, tobacco, and other resources that had previously been dubbed as luxuries in Europe as colonists were reliant on the export of cash crops as their major source of income. Sugar and tobacco became household staples in Europe, used commonly in everyday life. As mass production led to an increase in their availability in Europe, the prices of these goods decreased as well. This mass production helped fuel the initial development of the consumer economy in Europe because as more and more products were shipped to Europe, more people had access to them, and therefore their demand increased. This fledgling consumer economy was developed to its fullest through the Western Europe trading nations' policy of mercantilism. Mercantilism was an economic policy in which an imperial country took resources directly from its territories and imposed strict laws to prevent their colonies from trading with other countries, forcing their goods and profits to only reach the mother country. In mercantilist beliefs, the world was an arena of scarce resources and economic limitations, and the wealth of one nation could only increase at the expense of another. Therefore, countries continually competed with one another to control international trade. In the 18th century, Britain, France, and the Netherlands began to recognize the increasing desire their people had for products from the New World and Asia, and attempted to monopolize the trade of said goods through various policies. In their colonies, they were able to lay down navigation laws, tariffs, and foreign trade prohibitions to create a trade monopoly with them, as well as push out bounties to encourage the production of the goods they desired.
To further their mercantilist policies, imperial nations chartered private East India companies, which were monopolistic sea trade corporations that exploited trade with Southeast Asia and India. These companies, such as the British East India Company, the Dutch East India Company, and the French Compagnie des Indes, were used by imperial nations to control and regulate how and to whom consumer goods coming from their colonies and trading posts were sold, as well as to conduct trade within foreign markets to benefit European economies. By employing mercantilist policies, Britain, France, and the Netherlands were able to fully establish a consumer economy in Europe by securing a constant, heavy flow of goods into Europe through the creation of powerful monopolies. They expanded and competed mercilessly with one another in order to meet all the growing demands of the European people. Though imperial empires brought Western European trading nations great wealth and prosperity in the 18th century, their colonies' complacency would not last forever. At the end of the 18th century, an era of independence began, lasting up until the 1820s. Colonies, most notably those of the British on the North American seaboard and those of Spain in Mexico and Central and South America, fought for their freedom from the oppression of their mother countries and succeeded. The consumer economy and the economic prosperity that arose during the age of mercantile commerce also led to the Industrial Revolution in the next century. New jobs and businesses that emerged during this age continued to flourish and grow, fueling industrialization because of the newfound demand for mass-produced goods.